Hi, welcome to the Bin Min Podcast. We know that the Christian life can be hard to figure out, but we also believe that everyone should know the next step for making their spiritual life more important to them. I'm Pops.
I'm Dave.
And I'm Bob.
We've called this series Why You Can Trust the Bible, and we're looking at reasons why the New Testament that you have in your hands is a trustworthy historical document. And in keeping with that, we're going to talk today about why the Bible is reliable, looking inside and out.
Inside out.
Instead of, dude. A little in and out representing today.
I just thought it was apropos.
Nice. Looking
Right?
in, looking out.
Episode sponsored by In and Out?
I know.
Can we
I
say
wish.
that?
No.
I wish
No.
it was.
We're about 1,000 miles from the nearest one, so joke's on us.
Bob, why don't you remind the listeners and viewers why it is important that the New Testament is historically reliable?
Yeah. Christianity depends entirely upon the historical person of Jesus. And the New Testament is the primary source of information that we have about Jesus. So if these New Testament documents aren't reliable, we don't really have an objective historical way that we can know what Jesus said or what Jesus did. In other words, we couldn't establish whether Jesus is God or what he taught or what his followers did and taught. And that would not be a great place to be.
No, that's exactly
Yeah.
right. And before, we talked a little bit about the two main things that we're looking at. Dave actually in the previous episode said, look, we're looking at manuscripts and then we're looking at the authors. And so we're going to finish the manuscripts today. But Dave, before we actually get into that, why don't you just give us again the thumbnail overview of what are the three tests that we're using when we look at the manuscripts themselves?
Bibliographic, the internal, and the external. The bibliographic is what we covered in the last episode. That's, how accurately was the Bible handed down to us? So we did that last episode.
Nice.
The internal test is the second one. That's when we look inside the book, see what's written, and see if there's any errors or contradictions. The third one is the external, which you guessed it, is where we're looking at outside documents to see if any other first century non-Christian writings or archaeological findings support what's written in the New Testament manuscripts that we have.
Yeah, and when
Nice summary.
excellent. And so when we talk about the internal test, exactly as Dave said, we're going to look at what's written in the New Testament.
So let me ask. I'm going to turn the table and ask you, Dad, on this one because you're the one who's done most of the research on. What do you do with critics who claim, "Hey, there's errors in the Bible"?
Uh-huh.
In fact, there's someone saying,
lot of
"Hey,
them.
there's whatever, like 400,000 errors in the New Testament or in the Bible." How do you deal with that, Pops?
Yeah, and so I do have to admit that there are critics and skeptics that bludgeon new and young Christians with this. And of course, they don't really know what to say to that. I mean, that sounds very intimidating.
Of course.
400,000 errors. Well, let me just step back and just remind you that these aren't errors, okay? The overwhelming majority of these are what are called variants. And variants are overwhelmingly grammatical. So you can have spelling variants, you can have the use of synonyms,
That's my favorite flavor.
and you can have issues with word order. And to my mind, it just seems kind of sleazy to tell somebody that these are all errors. They're not. So
Right.
for example, let me just give you an example. A spelling variant might be the spelling in English, let's say, of theater. Some people will spell theater ending in ER. Others would spell it with RE.
Shout out to all of our listeners in the UK.
That's right.
I was going to say them and their aluminium, right?
That's right.
Then you have word order. Again, how unfair is it to call that an error if one verse says Christ Jesus, another one says Jesus Christ? You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Then you have synonyms. For example, if I say to you, close the door, and I say to you, shut the door, is anybody going to have any confusion about what that actually
Doesn't
means?
change my doctrine.
So
Ah.
I brought this up in the last episode. I want to say it again because it's just so powerful, okay? Dr. Bruce Metzger, who said that the New Testament has been accurately transmitted 99.5%. There are 20,000 lines in the New Testament. He found only 40 places, 400 words in the entire New Testament where we're not sure what the original would have been. That's 99.5%
That's incredible.
accurate.
Well,
okay?
and it's not like we're missing things, right?
Oh, and that 5.5%. Yeah.
Yeah, because we don't have the original originals. Those have long since turned to dust, I'm sure. You know, it's a matter of having too much.
Exactly.
And so we've got either scribal notes that have been co-opted and added in.
Good note.
But again, we're looking at this going, there are such tiny differences and nuances to your point that it's like, if you sent me a message that said, $1 million you have won, and you just yoded me, I would still be stoked because I know that I won $1 million.
Right.
So similarly, whether it's synonym or I'm flipping the R and the E in theater, that's where textual critics want to get ahead and get the win because they think they can invalidate the validity, authenticity, historicity of the thing. But again, our challenge that we sort of provided the answer in the last episode too was, yeah, it's not a matter of not having enough.
Yeah, exactly.
There being gaps that are going to impact the doctrine communicated in it, if nothing else.
Yeah, and like you said, Dave, a lot of little differences don't impact the message of the Bible.
Not in the least. And it's not that we're missing anything. And I love the way Dave phrased it. It's not that we're missing anything. We have 100%. It's just that we have maybe too much. And we just don't know which one fits there. One other thing about the variants I do want to bring up. And I want to know if one of you guys want to take it or I can take it. But if you want to take it, how does that actually prove what the original said?
Yeah, okay, so this is good. So we're just going to do a little exercise here for a second because hearing the word like, wait, variants and manuscripts, you can feel like you're kind of driving way off in left field too fast. So here's the example. Since we have thousands of handwritten copies, we can be pretty sure and accurately reconstruct the original.
Yeah.
So for instance, if I had 3 people hand me a copy of a message that they'd heard, an original message, but each of the 3 of them they messed up something just a little bit, I could still pretty easily figure out what the original message was, right? So if it said, like the first one said, "Mert me at 2 p.m." and the next one said, "Meet my at 2 p.m." and then the last one said, "Meet me at 2 p.m." Like, I could pretty easily reconstruct the original message that they all messed up a little bit was, "Meet me at 2 p.m." And then I'd probably have to ask them, well, wait, who am I supposed to meet at 2 p.m.?
And where?
And where?
What do I wear?
But you get the point. That's how we reconstruct from copies.
Yeah, and I have to, let me just add that. In that little brief example you gave, that doesn't even begin to compare with the overwhelming number of manuscripts we have and the tiny little bit of differences that exist.
That's right.
Yeah.
If you guys remember from the last episode, if you haven't, go check it out. But there are over 5,000 manuscripts that we have in Greek of the New Testament, whether in full or in part. That's a lot.
Yeah. Well, and let me tell you.
More than any other ancient document. I mean, way more.
Yeah, and I've told you guys this. Well, you guys know this. I was 28 when I came to Christ, okay? And so I had been imbued as a scientist with all of these other excuses why you can't trust the New Testament, right? Too many errors. The other one that I heard, and if you had asked me before I was 28, well, there are all these contradictions in the New Testament. Anybody want to tackle that?
Yeah, well, the contradictions that are supposed, and trust me, you can Google contradictions in the Bible, and you will be not without.
Which, side note, this is the in, right? This is the internal
yeah, this
test,
is the other
right?
one. So we have the errors, and then we have the contradictions. Those are the two things as we're reading the manuscripts themselves. That's what people will tell you. Errors and contradictions. Go.
So now we're going to go to these the next test of the 3, which is the internal test. And those ones that are supposed contradictions, let's just be very, very clear, except for very minor scribal errors and, maybe a handful of extraneous changes in the textual families, all the critics' allegations of error in the Bible are based on their interpretation errors.
Yeah.
Not outright absence, missing, contradiction. That is not what is happening. The Bible itself is without mistake, but the critics are not, right? We're talking about somebody who can approach it, and if you're going in with any level of bias, or you're not even going at it through all 5,000 manuscripts, right? You look at any even modern translation of the Bible. Is it just one person who's working on that project? No, you're going to have okay, you get my point. So when we're looking at this internal test, okay, this is where you're going to be Googling contradictions in the Bible, and you're reading and getting super depressed. Like, what? Trust me, there are excellent resources to answer each and every one of them.
Yeah.
But not just the translatory issues themselves. Let me just make a point that when you're considering the actual big picture, the macro message of the Bible, even the loosest English translation of it, and I won't say which translation I believe that to be. Just kidding. even the loosest translation still conveys the message that God intended, which is he sent his son, Jesus Christ, to redeem man, period, full stop. So any unresolved, like, minor detail or nuance at that level, at that micro level, does not invalidate the precise message, the historical accuracy, the historical evidence of the life, death, burial, resurrection of Christ. So again, watch the episode that precedes this one, but you gotta be fair. If you're gonna take a critical approach to it, you have to be fair to your methodology.
Yeah. Okay, so as we talked about, we want to know if the New Testament is historically reliable.
Yep.
And we said the big two ways are to look at the manuscripts, look at the authors. Mm-hmm. When we look at the manuscripts, 3 ways to look at it. First, the bibliographic test, looking at the number, how many, how early, how accurately transmitted.
And that was last episode.
That was the last episode. This episode, we started out by looking internally, looking at that. Are there contradictions? Are there errors? The last of the tests for looking at the manuscripts is going to be the external test. Right. And so when it comes to the external test...
Yeah, why don't you take this, Dad? So in the time that this was written, what was happening outside of just these New Testament documents that we have?
Yeah.
Give us the external test.
Yeah, so of the external tests, there are 2. One is, was there any contemporary writing that would actually confirm what's written in the New Testament?
Right.
The second would be, are there any archaeological findings that support what's written in the New Testament? Dr. Habermas, in his book, The Historical Jesus... Dr. Gary Habermas, in his book, The Historical Jesus, he actually cites 17 non-Christian writers. We're talking about Roman historians, Jewish historians, the Babylonian Talmud. We're talking about a Greek satirist. We're talking about Caesars, emperors. We're talking about Roman officials. They give us over 50 facts about Jesus and early Christianity that totally confirm what we read in the New Testament.
Which to me is awesome.
Yeah.
Just to pause, like if we didn't even have New Testament, like if every New Testament Bible was just like burned or something like that, like, whoa, actually all these other guys that weren't even Christians verify a lot of the basic facts of who Jesus claimed to be and what he was claimed to have done and what his followers did after him in the early church. It's like, that's incredible.
Yeah, and we have to also remember that these 17 witnesses were not Christians. They weren't followers of Christ. If anything, they were against
poking more holes in the myth and legend.
That's exactly
argument.
right. The second part is the archaeological.
Yeah, so not just writings. Tell us about that.
Yeah.
Well, if you're looking at John and Luke in particular, they list more than 140 unique people, places, and historical details that have been archaeologically confirmed. And that's where it gets really exciting, because then you go, okay, well, if I am still struggling to believe that this is historically accurate, oh, wait, let me throw on my Indiana Jones fedora and actually read the evidence, read the findings and the scientific journals and all that, and you're seeing it. I mean, there are tens of thousands of data points here from an archaeological standpoint. On our last episode, and now we're going to remind you about some of the work by Nelson Glueck in his writing Rivers in the Desert and History of Negev, where he said no archaeological discovery has ever controverted a biblical reference.
Yeah.
Whoa.
Well, we get to that point where I need to ask, so what? How has learning about the internal and the external findings of these manuscripts, how are they going to affect us, Dave?
Yeah, I mean, no Christian with sense in their head is going to say that there's 0% that there's ever been a copyist error in transmission.
Sure.
But that's not the point. What we're saying is the Bible is a historically accurate document free of errors itself. It's free of contradictions itself. But what critics claim is that errors only, that there's errors, 400,000 errors, No. Critics claim, what they claim as errors are only variants, and mostly are grammatical. Mostly things that don't in any way impact doctrine. They're mostly interpretation errors. So when we look at the evidence, especially from archaeology, for those decrying the scientific method and wanting that, look, read, dig in. You will find it. It is there. Read some of the authors we've been bringing up this episode and the last. It's overwhelming. So as a Christian, my so what is you can be so confident that the Bible is historically accurate. It's reliable, and it's trustworthy. So if there's an impediment for you or someone you know about the actual contents of it and the message of it because they're held up by this argument, start here, use your resources, and then you can move forward confidently.
Yeah. Dave, I love that. I just want to make sure that our listeners who are believers understand that what we're saying is that the only inerrant documents were the original ones. But Dave, it is so much what you said. We can trust that what we have is so historically reliable and that we have a clear reflection of what was originally written.
Yeah, well said.
Why don't you take us home? Give us a call to action.
So what's your next step? Ask someone who doubts. I hope that this has buoyed your confidence in the New Testament and that it's not just a bunch of made-up stories. It is accurate history. If you have someone in your life, like a family member or a coworker who doubts the Bible, ask them why they doubt it. Do they think miracles are impossible? Do they think that the Bible was made up way after Jesus lived? Do they think that just like later people threw in the miracles and the resurrection? You don't have to answer everything. Just listen. And if you want to share some of what you've learned, now you can share a few things, perhaps that you've learned over these last couple episodes, that the Bible is internally consistent with itself, that it's supported historically by other first and century findings in archaeology. And maybe if they haven't read the actual Gospels, you can even see if they're at least willing to read some of the New Testament with you with an open mind, maybe like the Gospel of Mark or the Gospel of John. Let us know in the comments. Let us know in socials how you asked someone about their doubts and what was helpful. It is awesome always to hear from you.
Yeah, thank you guys. And thank you for joining us for this episode of the Bin Min Podcast. We know that the Christian life can be hard to figure out, but we also believe that everyone should know the next step for making their spiritual life more important to them. Bin Min exists as a resource ministry to help you discover those next steps.
Yeah, that's right. So thank you for just jumping on today, listening to it, watching it. If you feel compelled, subscribing really helps just our own growth and reach. Hope you're blessed by what you experienced here today. If you haven't, check out binmin.org and also check out our socials, particularly the Instagram and TikTok. It's where our highest output is, but especially binmin.org is where you can sign up for the newsletter, which honestly is the best way to, stay up to date on what's happening with the ministry, because this isn't the only thing that Bin Min represents and does. There's a lot of men and women behind the scenes who are doing a lot of incredible things. There's other facets of the Min ministry that you may be encouraged by and maybe want to interact with or support or engage with. So yeah, check out the website, newsletter, socials. Thank you for your time here. We're looking forward to the next one. God bless.